Let's see. What am I doing? Oh, yeah, output recording. We need to output. Really? Fine. Alrighty, it looks like we're about to get started here. And my plan for today basically was just to get on, say hello to everybody, and hello to Dedlick. How are you doing today? Sweet. So today my plan was to showcase some of TouchDesigner, maybe provide a little bit of an intro for people who are streamers, maybe people who aren't streamers. But I approach it from the perspective of a streamer because we're familiar with tools like OBS. And getting into TouchDesigner for the first time, it's very daunting, right? Because you see all these different things that you can add to the canvas, and you don't know what the hell they mean. So my goal for today is to illuminate just a little bit, maybe provide one or two little tools and samples for you all to try at home. So feel free to check out the VOD and follow along. Okay, so here we go. This is TouchDesigner. We see this big old grid right here, and this is where we put all of our nodes. Now, what nodes do we put here, right? Well, in OBS, you're used to starting with, let's say that again, this time with feeling. In OBS, you're used to a canvas, a viewport, where you can drag and drop things in and make things happen. Unfortunately, TouchDesigner doesn't approach things the same way, although the inner workings are very similar in that they both render textures, they both have video processing abilities, and OBS has some, with OBS WebSockets, you have some ability to patch data into control sources and things like that. But the reason I love TouchDesigner is because it makes it so integrated with external tools like MIDI devices, OSC or Open Sound Control, keyboard, that type of stuff. You can patch directly into parameters to make things happen, like let's say turn a video on and off, quite simply, or change the opacity of a video. So maybe that's one place that we'll start when we get to doing like the demo part of things. So first off, this is TouchDesigner. I'm not going to explain the entire interface. There are a lot of tools, tutorials out there. There are a lot of tutorials out there that tell you what everything means in this window. Some things I do want to point out is this FPS up at the top here. This tells us what our frames per second that TouchDesigner is rendering at. You have a similar thing in OBS where you can see what your FPS is. Your target is to make sure that your FPS doesn't drop like crazy, because just like OBS, TouchDesigner can get bogged down if you add too much to it. This FPS on the bottom left, let's zoom in here. Hope I'm not I am blocking it, sort of, but if you take a look down here, this is FPS. Right here. Damn it, I'm blocking it with my stupid face. Anyway, we can change that. So let's change that to 30, since that's what we're going to be doing everything in. So we change the FPS to 30. You see up at the top it's 30 because we haven't done anything yet. So let's add something here and make something happen. So I'm going to add an operator here. Now an operator, I'll just show you what one looks like. An operator is one of these little boxes, or I call them nodes sometimes. I don't know the official term for them. I'm sure it's in the document. It's an operator, of course. Let's call them operators because that's the correct way to go about it. So we have different operators. For today, I'm going to focus on two. Tops, which means texture operators. So let's add a text box here so we can follow along. And a chop, which is a channel operator. Now, a top acts on textures. Textures are anything that you can do with video. So in OBS, you're used to everything, almost everything, being texture-based. The only thing that is comparable in channel or chops or channel operators is audio files. Audio in, audio out. Hey, Pat the Cap Header, thank you so much for your 4-month subscription. Welcome in. So, channel operators operate on data that operates on numbers. Exclusively numbers. Now, some things here may not seem like numbers, like audio device in is the main one I can think of. But believe me, at a fundamental level, an audio stream, is just a bunch of numbers being sent really, really fast in order to make audio happen. Hey, Beezabloop. Welcome in. So, hello, Blingbot. Welcome in. Okay, so to recap, tops are texture operators. They operate on things that you can see. Chops are channel operators. They operate on things having to do with numbers and things you can hear. So let's add a texture operator, one that we should be familiar with here, which is a video device input. And we're just going to link it to my camera. So we have my camera in here. Cool. You can see the mess that is behind me, but we'll ignore that. All right. Well, thank you for dropping in, Blingbot. So I have a camera in here. What can we do with our camera? See, when we look at this as a tool for streamers, we usually think like what we could do in TouchDesigner that we can't do in OBS. And I think about how do you get stuff from TouchDesigner to OBS. So let's start with that. Let's start with the simplest possible thing I can think of, and that is we're going to send this texture, this video, out to OBS. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Spout is a way to share textures. Spout is a way to share textures on the GPU from one program to another. So if you're familiar with NDI, that operates over a network, well, Spout operates on your local machine. So TouchDesigner has Spout built in. It also has NDI built in. We can get to that at some point. But if you're familiar with NDI, you can use NDI here to send to another machine. Let's say you have a streaming computer and you want to send from TouchDesigner over that streaming computer, you can do that. So we have our Spout. We're just going to use the default sender name, which is TD. Okay, so over here, let's take a look here. This is your parameters right here. So any parameters related to the operator that you're currently on will show up over here. So the only parameter we care about with the Spout right now is this, the name of it. And it's TD-spout out. Now we're going to connect this, and by connecting it, we're making this video in send to this Spout. That's what this link does. So if I open up my OBS here, I have a fresh install here. We will add a Spout source in. And it looks like I have a couple other Spouts. So we're going to just select TD-spout out, and there we go. You see me, and you see my glorious backdrop of cables and things sitting on my green screen. That's it. That's all you got to do. So Spout isn't built into OBS. by the way, it is a plugin that you can download. So if you search for Spout OBS, you'll find the plugin. It's really easy. It's made by Offworld Live, and it's been an integral part of my stream for a long time. So OBS Spout. Okay, so we've sent our camera out to OBS. So it's that simple to get something from TouchDesigner into OBS. Now, there is a Spout output now in the new version of the OBS Spout plugin, which we can use to send stuff to TouchDesigner. So let's do that. So I'm just going to add another scene here. And let's add in, let's say, a media source here. And I'm going to load up a media source that I'm going to use here. So let's find that. So Great Calzone's about the Twiddler firmware. That is a product which I'm going to be selling on my Ko-fi, or Ko-fi, however you pronounce it. It's in my panels here on my Twitch. So if you click on Buy Me a Coffee in the panels, you'll see the link to that, and you can follow there, and you can follow along with my channel in Discord to find out when that's going to be released. It'll be a fully featured product. You just plug into your computer, hook the Twiddler up, and it can send MIDI and OSC data. Okay, so I've just loaded up some video here. This is a guy flying at night with his drone. Now we're going to send this out to TouchDesigner. So I go into my scene, or we could do it on the source itself if we just want to send this source. But I'm going to click on Filters, and then I'm going to click Spout Filter. And the Spout name is right here, Spout OBS Filter. So this is what we're going to use in TouchDesigner to receive this. So I'm going to X out of this, go over to TouchDesigner, and we're going to bring that video into TouchDesigner using Siphon Spout in. Siphon is the Mac version of Spout. So we're going to use Spout OBS Filter, and there we have it. It's one because I think I created two of them. So for clarity's sake, I'll show you what I did here. It wasn't this one, it was probably here. I created another Spout filter. So let me get rid of that so we can keep up with the naming. Okay. Well, the way it worked is because that other Spout filter kind of still exists in memory, it didn't change it, but that's fine. I'd use a specific name. I wouldn't use a default one. Obviously, for organization, you'll want to make it very clear as to what the Spout source is. Hello, Not No Good. Welcome in. So we're bringing video in to TouchDesigner from OBS. Now let's hook this back out. So now we've created a loop. Video is being sent out from OBS into TouchDesigner, and I think what's happening. Okay, so this is another one of those quirks of OBS. Because the scene isn't active, the media source shuts down, I think. So what we can do to cheat that is we can add the scene as a background of this scene. There we go. Or is it just not receiving it? Let's see. We can see that it's receiving it right here on this window. So to prove to you that it's coming back, we're going to add a black background between the two layers. There we go. When I hide this, though, it stops rendering. So that's just a quirk of OBS. So if you're going to send a Spout source, make sure that it's rendering. Now that means that it has to be included in the current scene, or you can use other cheats too. Like you can add a source mirror. I don't want to get too much into like the complexities of OBS, but there's a bunch of tricks that you can use, and I can source mirror that scene, scene 2, or the video that I want. And then with a source mirror, you can use the, I'll show you what that looks like. Let's pretend this is a source mirror. I'll use a color correction filter, and you can set opacity to nothing. Now, this would have to be on a source mirror, because if you do it on the original source, it'll send nothing into TouchDesigner. But that's beyond the point here. So we're sending from scene 2 into TouchDesigner and back into OBS. So let's add something in here to process the video. So level, this allows us to adjust things like our brightness, gamma, contrast, and opacity, among some other stuff here. And it looks like our video stopped playing in OBS, so we're going to make sure that that video loops. Always. There we go. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to invert the video and send it back to OBS. And there we go. We've sent video from OBS to TouchDesigner and back. So what this means practically is that you could say have your camera in OBS, and then you could send that camera feed out to TouchDesigner, do something fun with it, send it back into OBS, and you'd also still have the original version of your camera that doesn't have any processing on it. So let's create something that might resemble, create something that might resemble an actual setup that you might have. So we're going to add a video source in here, video capture device. Is my OBS going to crash? My OBS is going to crash, and this is why OBS drives me crazy sometimes, and I like to do a lot of my stuff in TouchDesigner. To answer your question, Deadlick, yes, most of my I only use OBS for streaming and some video assets. So let's just relaunch OBS here. Okay, so let's load this up again. We're going to load up my camera. There we go. So let's call this scene camera. And I always recommend nesting your camera in its own scene anyway. And then let's create another scene. Let's call it like fun camera or something. We're going to send a spout out like I showed you earlier. So we're going to create a spout filter, which actually sends a spout from this scene out to spout. And you can consume that with, receive that with TouchDesigner, Magic Music, or any of the other video processing or VJ style programs. So we're just going to call this camera. Now let's see if it renders, if we can just bring it back into OBS itself. And it looks like it can. So it's one of those quirks about media sources is that they don't render if the scene's not being forced to render by including it in another, let's say. So Fun Camera is going to be a version of our camera that has something fun attached to it. Something fun that you can't do in OBS, but you can do in TouchDesigner. So let's bring our camera in. And so you can do this sort of thing in OBS, right? For those of you who are familiar, this is a color correction thing. You can adjust brightness, gamma, contrast. You can do all that with color correction in OBS. So that's not super exciting. So if anyone has any ideas for things that they want to accomplish that wouldn't be too tough in TouchDesigner, I'm willing to entertain that and maybe show you a tutorial on how to do that through the lens of a new TouchDesigner programmer. But if not, I'm going to show you, let's see, what can we do that's not entirely complicated yet? Do I need a purchase version if you don't have 2 instances of OBS? So You don't need to purchase the version of TouchDesigner to use it. It's free for non-commercial use, and that gives you 1280 by 720. If that answers your question. So what could we do here? I'm going to show you an effect that I've got. Now, this is not something I'm going to be... it's not something... this is something I'll probably release to you guys so you can use it for free. But it's not something I can explain easily on stream. This is a hologram style effect. So this has a bunch of stuff within it that creates a special effect that looks... It doesn't look very good on this camera because we haven't green screened it yet. But this is an example of a base operator, which includes a bunch of other stuff within it. And this is very complicated stuff. But anyway, let's try, let's see. I hadn't really thought of something. I'll show you something cool that you can do in TouchDesigner, I suppose. And that is we're going to remove the background using NVIDIA background removal. If you've been streaming for a while and been experimenting, you know what background removal is. You know what NVIDIA background removal is. So we're going to add an operator here called NVIDIA background. And we're going to hook my camera up to it. Now what you get is this. This is an alpha mask. What an alpha mask is it tells us the transparency of each pixel. So the black means that these pixels are fully transparent. White means that they aren't transparent, that those are actually pixels we want to see. Alpha masks matter when you're laying things over other things. So for those of you who use OBS, you might have experimented with masks, image masks, transparent images, that sort of thing. So it's a similar thing. So to break things down, we're looking at every image is a collection of pixels. And each pixel has a value. I'll show you here. We can actually click this plus, and I'll go R, G, B, and A. And A means alpha, red, green, blue, and A, or alpha. So what we have here is an alpha mask. Now the simplest way that I use this to remove a background of a person is using the reorder top. Oop, that's the wrong one. Yeah, and Dudlick, you mentioned that you have AMD cards. Unfortunately, you are out of luck. Okay, so we're going to hook in NVIDIA background to the second input. So if you take a look right here, it says input 1, source 2. There's 4 little inputs on this. We're going to connect to the second one. And it tells you if you hover over it. Input 1, source 2. Now we're going to connect my camera to input 1. Right there. Okay, we should be able to do a pixel sorting demo. I'm not sure if I could whip out a liquid shader in the amount of time that we have today, but we can create something cool. That's yeah. Okay, anyway, we've connected the camera to reorder input 1, and we connected the background to input 2. Now we have red, green, and blue. We want those to come from input 1. Now, our output alpha, we want that to come from input 2. Right here. Oops. Input 2. Okay. Now, we don't want it to come from the alpha channel, because if we look at our alpha channel of input 2, remember I said RGBA, alpha is 1, but our red, green, and blue are all the alpha mask that we want. I know it's confusing, but you can just follow along and do exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so we're going to select input 2, and we're just going to pick the red channel. And that gives us an image that looks like this. So you see, the transparency behind me, that's actually, if we select our alpha mask, all those pixels are transparent. And so if we feed this back into OBS, let's add, we've got fun camera. So there's one trick that we need to do here, and that is in OBS there's a setting called composite mode. Instead of opaque, we want that to be, oops, I'm sitting here trying to do it on another screen. Opaque, we want pre-multiplied alpha. Okay, so there's another bit of an issue that we run into with the way that OBS and TouchDesigner talk to each other, which I'll explain here in a minute. Okay, so we have what looks like the correct alpha, but we're going to make sure that we are sending RGB and alpha to OBS first of all, and it looks like we are. Oh, I don't think I selected the right camera, guys. So let's go to TD spout out. So now we have a transparent version of my camera we've sent back in through spout. Now you can do this with NVIDIA background removal, but TouchDesigner has that technology built into it. What we can do now then is create whatever our fun camera is. So I'm going to create a little something called feedback. Feedback's a fun effect. If you've sent a display capture into a display capture in OBS, you know what I'm talking about. You create like some gooey looking effects. It's the only way to explain it, or like a sort of like liquidy effects. So I'm going to add a feedback here. Feedback allows us to basically keep creating a feedback loop. So we're going to add feedback, and then we're going to add a composite in here. Take a break here and answer chat. Sorry I missed a notification. How are you today? Bucker Brogan says. I'm doing well, thank you. And thank everybody for showing up to this little tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me, and I'll explain it to the best of my ability. If I'm going too fast, slow me down just a little bit. There's a lot to unpack, but I'm trying to create maybe an example that you can kind of reverse engineer and learn from. And I will be putting this file up in my Discord too. So if you want to check it out there, it'll be there. I just hit a button, P, for parameters. That makes these parameters go away since I need the room. So we're gonna feedback works by having a target top which gets sent back into the feedback, and feedback adds the two together. That's the only way I know to explain it. So what we're going to do, we're going to add my spout, my transparent camera, into the composite. If you're familiar with OBS, it has compositing built in, but it's only, well, there's new blend modes. But if you're familiar with Photoshop, these are essentially blend modes. So we've got averaging, maximum, minimum, you know, all this kind of cool stuff. So you could even use this to make some cool effects by adding different sources together and seeing like what kind of effects you get out of it. But what I care about today is we're just going to use an over. So that puts one source over another source. It puts the top source, which in this case is our transparent camera, over the bottom source, which is our it's our transparent camera, but through the feedback. Now, how is feedback useful? I'll show you here in a moment. So feedback allows us to create an effect here where I'll explain once I finish this up. We're just going to add, we're going to scale our input by just a little bit. And always takes a little bit of brain work for me to remember how to do this. Okay, I think we need to swap these two first of all. No, that's not. Well, let's see. Maybe? Okay, how do I do this? this even working? Oh yeah, that's working. Okay. Just had to make sure it was doing something. So there's another trick that I do. Because we can see this background, I don't like seeing that in TouchDesigner. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove the background altogether. So I'm just going to ignore this stuff for the moment. And we're going to take our input. So this is our camera without any background removal. And we're going to add a multiply. Now multiply is just what it sounds like. We're multiplying, just like you do with math, all these pixels multiply with each other. So when I multiply this times this, you end up with something like this. Now I'm monochrome, and that's because it changed our color mode. We need to change our color mode back to 32-bit so we get that 32-bit color. Just like that. And then when this all adds together, we see what I'm expecting. And that is a transparent background without our, an image without our background. So, let's see, feedback. Oh, we didn't select our target top. I forgot to do that. There we go. We end up with something weird, right? It's not what I was going for yet. This is what I was going for. So if you've seen this type of effect, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about feedback style effects. We can hit this little display button, which actually adds it as our background in TouchDesigner too, so you can see a little easier what's going on. So this is a really stupid, simple effect. It's not a stupid effect, it's just very simple. And feel free to play with it. Now what you can do with this, so I like things that look really cool but don't take a lot of, this takes like no GPU to do. Because all you're doing is feeding this back into itself. You're not having to cache frames or anything, which can get expensive to the GPU. So we're going to do an HSV adjustment. What we're going to do then with this HSV is we're just going to offset the hue by 1% every time it feeds back through. So you'll get like this rainbow thing coming off of me. So all the colors basically change over time. If we want to be more extreme, we can change that hue offset to a lot bigger number here, and you get sort of like a rainbow tunnel thing. That's kind of cool, right? So this is it doesn't have to be a person. This can be anything, right? This could be any transparent object. You need transparency because what's happening at the edges here is that those edges get scaled up, and then it gets scaled up every single step of this feedback loop. So that's a really cool effect. I mean, you got kind of like this oil slick sheen going off on my right here. So what I like to do when playing with an effect like this is I'm going to add a blur into here so we don't get like quite, see those crisp edges that happen with my fingers? I don't like those. I want it something a little more artistic. So let's add a blur in. We're going to add a blur in after the HSV adjust, but it doesn't really matter. And that's just going to blur every step. So you end up with a little smoother edges. So you end up with like just this like trippy, sort of trippy effect. So now that we have this transform in here too, we can also rotate. You don't want to rotate a lot or you get something crazy. Like this is even just rotating one step, one degree. And you end up with this like this swirl, right? So I like to rotate just a little bit. So you end up with like this slow rotation. And look, it just looks very organic. It looks very like fluid. And like I said, we don't have to make a shader. We don't have to do something that costs us a ton of GPU power. It's an effect that pretty much anybody's computer can do. And to prove that to you, I'm going to collapse all these nodes into a network. Now collapsing, this is another beautiful thing. So OBS has scenes where you're able to put a bunch of sources into one little package and use that package in other places. You can add a scene as a source in other scenes, right? Well, TouchDesigner has these things called components that we can collapse everything into. So I've just collapsed it into a base. So if we go inside here, we've created like a sub-network, which is a lot like sources in a scene. So I'm going to output this. So we're going to, when we add an out, that takes it from inside of this base one and outputs it over here on the right. So if we output this, we should always add a null, or I like to add a null after an operator like this because it forces this operator to cook. Now cooking is when things get rendered. TouchDesigner can be very efficient, and you can create logic that only renders things when they need to be, let's say when they're being accessed. But that also means that you need to make sure that your networks are being rendered. And being rendered reliably, which is why we add a null. So if we take a look here at our cook time, we notice here it's like 1 millisecond. And we can actually add something here called an info. Oops, wrong place. We're going to add an info chop, which tells us everything we need to know about this base. Okay, I was wrong about that. There we go. We have to add our cook time. So that tells us how quickly it cooks. I can't get into the complexity of that, but there's CPU cook time, there's GPU cook time. GPU cycles are precious in our computers. We have a lot of CPU overhead, but most of us don't have an RTX 3090 to render off of. And even if you do, you want to make things efficient. So that was just a tiny little primer on efficiency. So anyway, if you have any questions about that, let me know. But that's a pretty complex subject in and of itself, is making sure that you're doing things efficiently. And this is very efficient. We can make things more efficient in TouchDesigner by turning off these viewers. See, every time it renders one of these little steps here, that costs GPU time. The GPU has to paint this to this operator and this and so forth. So these flags right here, this is a viewer. If we turn this off, I'll zoom in here so you guys can see. If we turn off this viewer, we don't see those anymore, and so that saves. There's also a bypass, which means those things don't work anymore. And then there's a lock, which means we can't modify it until we unlock it. Explain adding delay to steps in between steps. Do you mean sort of like a render delay? Okay, so we're going to pass this back. Yo, Cuban Beat. Thank you so much for that 2 months in a row subscription. Much appreciated, dude. Welcome to the stream. Okay, so we had a question about passing the output to OBS. You just use a spout output. So I explained that earlier on in the video, but I'm going to go over it right here. We had a siphon spout out, and we're going to output it and just call this crazy effect. If we go back to our OBS, we're going to add that in to OBS through a Spout 2 capture, which is a plugin that you can download. So we're going to use crazy effect in OBS. So now we've created an effect that takes the camera from OBS, sends it to TouchDesigner, and brings it back into OBS to create this cool little effect. And this is a scene that you can switch to on your stream, and people wouldn't know that you're not using OBS. So you have a feedback node. What's the best way to adjust its parameters? So feedback doesn't do much besides just take whatever you're feeding in as the target top and combine it with the input of feedback. That's the best way I know how to explain it. There's probably better documentation that explains it. Let's take a look. If we click this little help, every operator has a help section. So we could take a look. The feedback top can be used to create feedback effects in tops. It can give fake motion blur by not clearing the color buffer. The feedback top's input image will be passed through whenever feedback is bypassed. When feedback is activated, the feedback will output an image stream sourced from its target top. By selecting a target top downstream in the feedback network, other filter tops can be added in. So what it does is it takes this comp right over here, and it just brings it back here. Now we can cheat and create a fake version of feedback by using a select top, which I'll get into later because it's a really cool texture operator too. Or top. What's up, plant boys? So our feedback, that's all it does, but we created this little effect so we can adjust various things here to play with it. So they talked about a motion blur. I'll show you what that looks like. So we're going to go ahead and not translate this anymore. So all we'll get is like this persistence. Oh, we also need to stop the rotation. You just get like sort of this image persistence, right? It doesn't move except a little bit because of the blur. If we bypass the blur, it's just going to stay on screen but change colors. It looks like it's shifting a little bit too. So let's see what's going on there. All right, I'm going to reset the feedback here. There we go. See how it's just staying there? The shifting colors because of the HSV adjust. So let's get rid of that. And now you just get basically like this layer that just stays there. So we can make a fake motion blur. Let's make a fake slow motion using feedback because that's a cool effect that involves that's really simple to do but looks cool on stream, I guess. So we're just going to ignore this guy for now. So this X is going to stop it from cooking since we don't need to use it right now. This little X is on certain operators. By Xing it out, it means nothing in there renders, and so you save GPU cycles. So we're going to create the same network that we created before with the feedback from scratch, but this time we're going to create sort of like a slow motion, fake slow motion effect. So if I feed, we're going to feed the camera in here to my feedback. The feedback is not reset, so it just stores the texture coming in. We're also going to add a composite again. We're going to composite the output of our feedback and also our original output on top of that. And then we're going to use a top as our blend mode, or operation they call it. So a top just puts one thing on top of another, just like this. So I'm on top of whatever the feedback actually meant over. There we go. Because the top uses the alpha mask. Okay. So now I'm over what the feedback's output is. And if we reset our feedback, nothing happens because we have to hook our comp back into feedback. And then, how did I do this again? Every time I have to remember how I did this. Reset. Oh, yeah, because I had reset on. There we go. So now it creates like this persistent image, which isn't cool. I mean, it's all right, but we can do that in OBS. And for some reason, my camera's blurry. Come on, fix. The heck, dude? I'm gonna try turning my camera off and on. There we go. Okay, so all we're doing is compositing over the last frame. But if we do a little trick here, we're going to add a level in here. And we're going to have the opacity drop just a little bit every time it feeds back through. So you'll get like these trails that happen. See that? So we're going to up the opacity just a little bit. So the more we up it, you see that the more like persistence we get. So you have to play with that a bit. So I like 0.99 or 0.98. That's probably too much still. 0.95 gives you like this persistent. Thank you for the following, Terry, backup Terry. So you get like these persistent trails, right? You're also seeing the green here, and I can fix that, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. It's because the NVIDIA background removal that we did earlier actually is slower than the camera by a couple frames. Now you may wonder, how do we slow this video down by a couple frames? Well, it's pretty simple to do that. First, going to add a cache. Now, a cache is really cool in TouchDesigner because it allows us to, just like it says, cache a certain number of frames. For those of you who are familiar with OBS, render delay uses a similar mechanism. Also, I don't remember the plugin right now, but I think it's like Replay or something. Anyway, we're going to hook this cache into cache selects, because if we look in our cache select, it says cache top. That's what it's expecting. That's the cache that it's referencing. So there's a tiny little virtual link here that tells us that these two things are connected. So we're caching frames. If we look over in the parameters here, active means that the cache is currently buffering frames. If we turn that off, we'll notice that my video stops. Now, that means that it actually cached right over here, cache size. It cached 32 frames in the GPU's RAM. So what we can do over in our cache select, if we move this, you can't see it much. Let me do something more more active so you can really see it moving. So we're gonna move my hand around like that. So if we take a look here, we step through this. If we go sorry, we're moving off screen here. A cache index of 0 means that it's the most recent frame, and minus whatever is that frame number. So 32 is the last frame because we only cache 32 frames. We can cache as many frames as you want, but it does take GPU memory to do that, to cache. We'll create an effect with cache later so I can better explain it. Something that's just a fun little looping style thing. So if I middle click on this operator, it actually tells us what we need to know about the GPU memory. So it says GPU memory, this top, it's using 261 megabytes. And all tops is 775. So every frame uses a certain amount of memory, and it has to store those on the GPU. It doesn't use your computer RAM, it uses your GPU RAM. Okay, anyway, what I set out to do with this is we're gonna actually delay our video coming in by 2 frames to match with our broadcast, or NVIDIA background removal, I guess is what you call it. So that should have done it. So what I did in cache select, I said cache index -2, meaning get me what was here 2 frames ago. If I did -30, that's going to be 30 frames, which is 1 second ago. So now if we look here at the output, there's still a little bit of a lag. Let's see. Oh, did I do this backwards? I think I might have done this backwards. We may have, oh yeah, I think we have to delay the other thing. Wait, would that make sense? I don't remember. There we go. I got it. I guess it's 3 frames. I thought it was 2, but it depends on your graphics card and all that kind of stuff. So now you see there's not like that green trail anymore. There's still like a green hue because of the background removal and the way we did it. There's just like a tiny bit of hue, but that's fine. So let's go back to what I was working on, and that is our slow motion style effect. So that gives us something like this. Now if we swap operation order, something magical happens, and that looks something like this. It creates a slow motion style effect. So when I stop here, you'll see that when the frames composite, it looks clear, but when they don't, everything kind of blends. Creates this cool, like, motion blur style effect. So that's what they mean when they talk about motion blur. So you can tell that I'm like I am really like blurry. So I want to reduce that blur. And we reduce that blur, strangely, by reducing the opacity of our feedback network. So you see here, I reduced it to 0.75, and you end up with like a more subtle style effect. So that's like it's a slow motion effect. Really easy to do, also very efficient on the GPU. Any questions so far? Any commentary, feedback? Anything you want to see? That went very weird. Look at that. Those fingers are all adding up. That's because I filtered this out, filtered this out, and filtered this out. So that's the other effect that I created earlier. So like I said, I'm going to provide this file in my Discord. For those of you who want to play around with it and follow along with what I did on the stream, you can do that. We can accomplish a similar effect with a bunch of cache selects with different frames and add them up, but that would cost more GPU. So this is the most efficient way to execute that style of like slow motion effect. Could we do something else cool here? Let's see. And then I like to just play around with things and see what happens. That's how I learn most of this kind of stuff. I just mess around. What's up, Trash Boat? Welcome in. Welcome in, hot dude. So, Woat has a question here. Is there any reason to export the network as a shader to use inside OBS, or is TouchDesigner more efficient at handling through Spout? I like using TouchDesigner. I've not tightly integrated with OBS like that. I don't think you could, actually. Maybe someday someone will come out with an OBS and Touch Engine plugin, which means you can actually play TouchDesigner inside of OBS, which would be really cool, because then you could combine the two even more tightly. But for now, we have Spout. So to answer your question, it is more efficient to run it through TouchDesigner, because I don't like running things in OBS's. It's in its memory space and its CPU space, because of how easy it is to crash OBS with shaders, right? So TouchDesigner has proven a lot more reliable than OBS ever was for this kind of stuff. And I think it's definitely easier to debug a problem, because you can see every step of the process, which is not something you can see in OBS if you combine a bunch of things, and you can diagnose where your issue is. If you have a massive shader in OBS, you just you have to know what you're doing to diagnose the problem. And I had to learn what I was doing in order to learn how to program shaders in OBS. But once I started crashing OBS regularly, I figured I had to find a better solution, and that's where TouchDesigner came along. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to show you a really cool effect that is one of my favorites. It's pretty efficient on the GPU, but it does take some GPU RAM to execute it. So we're just going to go ahead and move these guys over here. And I'm going to add a null after this reorder. Nulls can also be used for things like rerouting nodes. So we're going to reroute these nodes, or these connectors, they call them, by patching them into the null. So now everything comes in this null, and then we can branch out to another null here that we're then going to connect to this thing that I'm going to show you how to do. Okay, so first off, we need a time machine. Now, time machine sounds really cool, right? And it is just as fucking cool as it sounds. But let's not get there yet. We're going to use our time machine here. But in order to use a time machine, you need something called a texture 3D. Now, here's where you get into some esoteric, not esoteric, some technical things about what a texture 3D is. Quite simply, a texture 3D is exactly what it looks like. When I pass my camera in here, you're going to see a bunch of frames. So a texture 3D basically is a buffer that stores a bunch of frames all in one big canvas. So imagine it taking a bunch of pictures and placing them in a grid. That's literally all it does. And that's useful for this effect that I'm going to show you, because it can only be done with a time machine. So to do this effect, we're going to add our camera in, and then we're going to connect our texture 3D to our time machine here on the top input. So the top input says input 0 source 1, input 1 source 2. They don't really tell you what that means, but if you check the documentation, number 1, they expect to be a time machine input, and number 2, they expect to be the frame, how to get the data out of that time machine, that texture 3D. So you can get a fun little effect by taking a noise. A noise is literally what it sounds like. It's random. If you don't understand what noise is, in computing it means random information. So you're used to like white noise on a TV. That looks like this, right? So let's just hook this in. Let's make it truly random though, by reseeding it every time this cooks. So we're just going to seed it. Oh, we're going down another rabbit hole here. Every parameter in TouchDesigner can either be manually entered or you can program. So we're going to just add a little programming thing here. And this is a little thing that you can use. If we click the second box, it's an expression. That's something in Python. It's Python code. We're just going to put abstime.seconds, which is a global parameter in TouchDesigner. And that basically constantly seeds this random. So you get what looks like TV static. So if we hook that into our time machine here, here's what you get. You get sort of like a dissolve effect, like a disintegration, reintegration style effect. And I think that's really cool. Now we can make this look a little less fuzzy when you move around. Yeah, I'm like a Sandman. By changing a parameter here in our time machine. So this black offset, we're going to change it to like minus 23. So that means it's less frames between the darkest part of our input, our second input, and the lightest part of our second input, which is the white pixels. So every black pixel, just to explain how this, let's minimize this for a second, just to explain how this time machine works. every black pixel in our noise, let's freeze this noise for a second. Every black pixel is the least how do I explain this? Is our black offset. So black means 0. So it's minus 23 frames. If this is a perfectly black pixel, it's going to show us at that pixel what this image looked like 23 frames ago. And our white is going to be what it looks like now. So you see this is completely and utterly random. So it looks very like, it looks random, right? It looks like I'm just, I don't know, coming out of static or something, right? Hey, Hurricane X, welcome in. So this is a pretty cool effect, right? We can do an effect where I move over here. Boom. Boom. I mean, something you're doing in real time. How cool is that? This is Hollywood special effects, baby. But Hollywood, they'll use like particles and shit, which is beyond the scope of what I want to show today. We can adjust this just a little bit so you get something more like this, so it's a lot quicker, right? But if we change this black offset to the furthest back that our texture 3D has, you end up with like an effect that takes quite a while to happen. Okay, anyway. So now that you have this, if you emulate what I did here, you can now plug in other stuff into the time machine to see what happens. So let's try something like this. Let's hook our own camera in as the second input to a time machine. You ready? Looks something like this. It's so gooey. I love this effect, dude. This is one of my favorites because it uses its own input to basically like sort of like stretch your image. I don't know how to explain it, but you see what I'm talking about. Okay. So that's cool. Let's try another input as our second input. You can have a Python only top. Yes. To answer Rote's question. So you can add a Python top. So that's a script top, which uses NumPy, or you can use NumPy and OpenCV to send textures out. So in this case, this default script is just creating a random grid of pixels. And it's only, what is it, 2 by 2 by 4 or something? Yeah, 2 by 2 pixels. So that's size is 2 by 2 pixels with a 4 channels. So RGB and A. So yes, you could do a script. You can also use GLSL. If you use the shaders, you use a GLSL, and you can just write a shader within TouchDesigner. Okay, so let's try another input into our time machine, and that is going to be another noise, but this time we're going to use Perlin noise, which creates more of like an organic style effect. So if you take a look at Perlin noise, how it manifests in Time Machine, so you get like this gooey stuff going on. Very cool. Very gooey. Now some of you may have some things that you want to do on your stream. or that you've seen before. So I'm going to take a bathroom break, but if you have an effect that you'd like me to show you or explain or try to do in TouchDesigner, let me know and I'll do it. Otherwise, I'll move on with a couple more examples and explain chops when I come back. So I'll be back in 5 minutes at most. I need to get a little snack, take the dog out, and get some water. I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. So what you say, pixel sorting, a freeze frame every 10 seconds after hotkey press would be cool. I'm not sure how to constantly pixel sort. A continuous stream is a good idea. Okay, so I do have a pixel sort. Right here. I didn't create this. Someone else created it from a YouTube tutorial and gave it to me. But this is a tox. So a tox. Let me explain what that is. This is a tox is a component that you can share with other people and that they can drag right into their TouchDesigner and use it. That's something also that OBS doesn't have, is the ability to easily like drag and drop in everything you need in order to run a special effect or a scene or something. You can do that with a tox file in TouchDesigner. So I'm going to hook my camera into my pixel sorter. And we're going to output a null so we can see what's happening with the pixel sorter. And this is what we get as our output. I'm feeding in my GUI camera, so that's why I look distorted like that. So you asked, Wout asked about pixel sorting a freeze frame every 10 seconds or so. So let's do that. Let's create that very thing. And that will involve using chops. So we're going to feed this into our pixel sorter first. Feed our original image. It doesn't have any time machine stuff or any of that. And we're outputting our pixel sort over here on the right. So the first thing I would do if I was going to do an effect like that, you can transition or you can overlay it, whatever you want to do. We're just going to go ahead and do an overlay. And put our pixel sort on top of our image. So it looks like this. Actually, you said freeze frame, so let's do that. Let's just be faithful to what the original request was. And I'm going to hide this background because we're not working on the time machine stuff at the moment. Okay, we're going to output from the pixel sorter out here, just like that. So in order to accomplish this, we need to have our original source, and then we need to have the pixel sorted version. And we can switch between those using a switch top. This switches between sources. So we're going to input our pixel sorter, our pixel sorted image, and our original image, and we're going to switch between them when we do the pixel sort. So if we take a look at our index here, when I switch this, when I switch to 1 or greater, it switches to the pixel sorted version. Just like that. Now, TouchDesigner, in TouchDesigner, one of the chops that you have is a keyboard, which makes it really easy to use keystrokes within TouchDesigner. These aren't global, though. So these only work if you're in the TouchDesigner window, unlike OBS where you can have global hotkeys. So I'm going to hook up button 1. We'll just have 1 do this. So a channel operator, like I said, is numbers. In this case, it is a value, or a key, which is K1, and a value, which is 0. And the 0 becomes a 1 when we hold down the key. So this basically is like a little switch. 0, 1, 0, 1. Okay. So we're going to use the 0 and 1, and we're going to do something cool here. We take this keyboard and we just drag it in. Oh, I'll show you what I did here. I click this viewer active right here, which then allows me to highlight over a channel, and I can drag that channel into my index. And we do something called a chop reference. So now my button 1, oops, let's reset so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so when I hold down button 1, you can see that it switches. But we don't want to have to hold it down, right? We want to be able to just press it and toggle the effect on and off. So we can use a logic chop, which you can, it's a lot like programming if you're used to that. If not, basically what we're going to do is we're going to just toggle this, a value off and on. So in order to do that, we use channel pre-op and we toggle. So that means everything that comes in, if it's a 0, it's not going to do anything, but if it's a 1, it toggles back to 0, and you'll see what I mean. So all we got to do is select toggle and leave everything else the same. I just press 1, and this becomes 1, 0, 1, 0, which is really cool. And you can use that formula. There's a bunch of different ways to do things in TouchDesigner, so don't take what I say as gospel and feel free to experiment and learn, because there's a bunch of different ways to accomplish this. If you're more comfortable with programming, you can use scripts and chop executes and things. But you don't have to be. I can just show you this logic, this K1, we're just going to drag it into our index. So now, when I press 1, it'll toggle. Now I think I hooked a 1 up to my pixel sort. I did. Look at that. That was sneaky of me. So this pixel sort has a 1 key as the event trigger. I'm going to get... let's see. 1 second. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this keyboard input. Whoops. So that way we're not hiding it in there, and we'll just use the same keyboard input to trigger it. So my pixel sorter has a parameter here called sort. So when we push that parameter, when we push this button, it makes the effect happen. I'll show you what I mean. When I click this, oops, what did I do here? Feedback. Okay, we're just going to use sort here. I don't need to explain the idiosyncrasies of this because this is something I'll just give you and you can just use it by hooking something in and pressing that pulse button. But in this case, we're going to use my keyboard button to hit that pulse. So you can do the same thing we did earlier with a switch, and we can drag this value of keyboard in to sort and then use a chop reference. So whenever we press the 1 button, that button gets pulsed. So you can see it here. And as far as our switch goes, we can use the same thing. So in this case, we're actually pulsing, whoops, we're actually pulsing it when we turn it on and off, which does take some extra GPU and CPU cycles. So this is the effect that Walt wanted right here. So we've got my normal camera. Let's zoom out. And we press the 1 button. So we could do some stuff to like transition more smoothly and things, but that's essentially the effect. You press 1 and it switches to the pixel sorted version. So you notice you have a bit of like a delay there, right? So we're going to fix that by adding, we can use a delay chop on the keyboard input. And we're going to wait to switch until the pixel sorting effect starts. So let's add a delay in. We're going to hook our keyboard into the delay. Oops. There we go. And let's delay this by you could do frames, samples, or seconds. Or fraction. But we're going to delay by number of frames here. Since I like doing everything based on frames, we'll delay by 15 frames. Now let's do 6 frames. That's a that's 20% of a second, or 0.2 seconds. Max delay will do 8 frames. Just give a little bit of a range there. And we're going to hook the delay up instead of, we're going to hook our delay to our logic. So it delays the toggling of the keyboard button. So keyboard, delay, logic. So we're going to hook in, oh, the logic's already there. So let's take a look at our output again. There we go. The effect looks, oh, let's zoom out. The effect looks a lot smoother now, right? Because we switch after it has time to grab the frame and do the pixel sorting. But it looks like in some cases we're jumping into a pixel sorting that's already started. Okay. I know there's a lot of ground to cover, and I know there's a lot to this program. I'm not going to pretend like it's easy to learn, but the results you can get out of it in streaming are pretty cool, because there's things you can do in this that you can't do in anything else. And I will be releasing some of the tools that I've created to my Discord and to my Ko-fi, or Ko-fi, which is accessible in my panels and the video description when I upload this to YouTube. And you'll be able to just drag those in and use them as well. So I have, what can I show you here? I have my hologram effect that I created. So this is an example of a type of effect I might upload. And it's basically a self-contained effect. So we hook our image in right here on the... Oh, that's my GUI image. That's fine. Then we're going to output the output of this so we can see it in our null. And that creates sort of like a hologram style image. To demonstrate it better, I'm going to hook up my camera without the GUI style effect, though. So you can see what it looks like with a clean webcam image. There we go. And this becomes useful for certain scenarios, like let's say you want to overlay this over another scene or something. We're going to hook up like a movie file in. And just grab a sample movie from our TouchDesigner. And you can see what it looks like. Because it's slightly transparent, it creates a really cool like sci-fi hologram look. Like that. It's very convincing, I think. And this is all 100% organic, created by yours truly, DJ_Teo. And when I do release this, I'm going to have some ways to configure it, so you can adjust, like, you know, see how it's blinking a lot, and then there's like sort of a slow roll fade and some scan lines, like all that stuff is like separate parts of this whole network. Okay, anyway, this is supposed to be a beginner's tutorial on TouchDesigner for streamers. In the beginning, I showed how to input from Spout from OBS and then output to Spout. Which means that anything that you see on YouTube or elsewhere, any tutorial that you read, any sample file that you open, you can now integrate from OBS over to TouchDesigner and then from TouchDesigner back out to OBS. The advantages to doing things in TouchDesigner, just to recap, are the ability to have toxes or components like this that you can just drag into your network and use right out of the box. So these are effects that people like me create that you can just drag in and use, as long as you have permission, obviously, from them to do it, or they're providing it under an open source license or with similar permissions. And you can just drag it in and output from that, which is really cool. Compared to OBS, you'd have to import a shader, maybe change some parameters around. If you have a really clever developer, they can do a lot of that stuff automatically, but it behaves different on every machine. TouchDesigner has been very reliable on having this effect could work on a Mac too, I believe. There's nothing that's Windows specific. So anyway, let me see what else I could talk about in relation to streaming. We'll bring our camera in here. We're outputting it back to OBS after doing some effects to it. I showed you the feedback style effects, which you could play with that style of effect. I showed you the time machine, which is another low cost to the GPU style effect. I'm going to show you acid trip. I don't remember what this is, but it's probably cool if I called it acid trip. This is an effect that I created. Doesn't do anything. Okay. I hooked up the wrong thing. So this is acid trip. This is another like feedback style effect, but I did some compositing and threshold adjustment, so you get something that looks a little more weird. Does anyone have any questions? Lots in color correction. What's the color mode of the output from TouchDesigner? Good question. You can select your color format using, or you can select your pixel format. As far as coloring, it just passes the texture exactly as it's outputted from the GPU. So you'd have to color correct it or do that sort of stuff in OBS. You can use LUTs within TouchDesigner. So there's an open color IO top that allows you to hook up your own LUTs and change things like color space using that. So to answer your question about color spaces, you can do that with the open color IO. Hook up LUTs and transform color spaces. Okay. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about what some of the texture operators do, the tops do, because I haven't covered a lot of those, but we're just going to browse through them here. At least the ones I think are relevant today for anyone who wants to get started. So I've shown you cache and cache select. That's basically a frame buffer or a cache of frames that you can move between to do some sort of an effect with them, or correct for a latency between audio and video. Channel mix allows you to output RGB and A in different ways. Useful if you're messing with that sort of thing. A chroma key is what it sounds like. It's a very, very simple chroma key, but it's a chroma key nonetheless. So something like OBS does a little bit of heavy lifting for you when it comes to chroma key, but this allows you to create a very simple chroma key. And you should be able to find information on how to use that online. But I prefer to use the built-in chroma key, which is in the palette over here. This is called the palette in TouchDesigner. It is pre-made components that you can use. And I've built a lot of my own, so if you look down here where it says my components, these are all components that I've created. Now the chroma key here has like a default image that they use so you can test it out. We're going to input our own from our camera. So we're going to drag this into chroma key, because that's something people probably do a lot as well. And then this component's cool because I can just click. I'm doing control click on all the green spots I can find. And then it has some features built in like edge smoothing. Let's zoom out a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Like edge smoothing, which removes some of those harsh edges to make your chroma key look a little smoother. It's got spill hue adjustment, which means that if like there's a green spill, it'll fix it. I never use that because it makes the image gray on the edges. And then we're going to just get rid of this other little spot of green. And boom, now we have a chroma keyed image which we can output on our first output. And you can see what that looks like. That's a cool operator to know. That's in the tools in your palette. I've gone over composite. Composite allows you to combine multiple layers with blend modes that you'd use in something like Photoshop. There's constant, which is a constant value, but for us it basically just means a color. So you can output like a color if you need that for something, which I use a lot for various things like creating a black background. It's a lot like the color in OBS. I'm not going to go over those. Crop, that's what it sounds like. You can crop images. Edge and emboss, those are filters. They're a lot like something you'd find in Photoshop. You can do edge finding. You can do embossing, which is very similar. These are things just to save you time of having to program it yourself or find a shader that does it. So that's the emboss. There's some clever stuff you could do with them too. GLSL, those are shaders. And GLSL multi shaders. You can add a connect or connect Azure into here, and you can use that point cloud data to make some cool stuff. That's some more advanced stuff, but they have some demos here that you can use if you happen to have one of those lying around. Level is what I used earlier to adjust the color and opacity and all that. Lens distort is handy if you have a camera like a GoPro that has a very severe lens distortion, like a fisheye or something. You can correct it with that. I've used that for that exact purpose. NDI in and out, those are very handy. Movie file in and out, you can bring a movie file in, and you can also output a video from any operator, which I've used to just record. Instead of sending it into something like OBS and recording, you can just output straight from any texture operator. So if I wanted to record my webcam, I could just hook my webcam straight to the movie file out, and then you can attach audio, and that's information about that is in the documentation. Or I'll show you real quick here. We can add a chop or channel operator for an audio device in, and here's my audio. So I'll click and drag that to the movie, and now our audio chop, that's the audio that's going to be recorded to this video. So when I hit record here, it's recording. When I hit stop, it stops. Now, TouchDesigner is so advanced that I have created a very simple video editor by combining a few different operators in TouchDesigner, because you can go frame by frame through a video, and you can output video, and you can trim video start and finish times. So it has a lot of building blocks. If you're so motivated that you wanted to make your own nonlinear video editor, you could do it within TouchDesigner. And unfortunately, guys, I'm kind of losing my voice right now. I don't know why. So I don't want to strain it too much. And I also don't want to overwhelm you all with stuff at the moment. I'll do a little more research into some other stuff, and if you have any questions about anything, or again, I'd asked earlier, but if you have any effects or something that have been challenging to do in OBS that I could show you how to do in TouchDesigner, hit me up in my Discord. For now, thank you all, Hell Breaks Loops. For now, I need to go rest my voice and figure out why I'm getting a sore throat. I'll find someone to raid here too. All right. And again, thank you all for coming in. Thank you so much for all the support, for hanging out, for contributing to the conversation, or just lurking. Everything is valued here in this stream. For those of you who haven't been here before or haven't been here in a while, I do a lot of different things. I am an IRL streamer. I have a really cool IRL setup that I take out whenever the weather's nice. It has not been nice recently, so I haven't been able to do IRL streams. And I also haven't done the PC stream stuff in a while. So thank you for showing up for that. I apologize it hasn't been it for a while because I've been busy working on the Sushi Dragon Presents and some other projects I have going on. You know, have to pay the bills. So I'd like to come back and do some more streaming, not only just the technical content, but, you know, some actual content, which is fun. Yeah. So again, thank you, and we will be rating Astra Canuck. He does live astrophotography. Haven't rated him in a while and haven't watched his stuff in a while. So he's pretty chill and very knowledgeable about stars and planets and all that kind of stuff. So if you're into that, which, I mean, who isn't? Check his stream out. He's a real cool guy. Raid's been started, everybody. Until next time, have a great night and get your pet spayed neutered. And we'll be seeing you next time. Later.